So, thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I'm talking about issues related to public transport. Today's topic is going to be the Tel Aviv Metro, an ongoing in planning project in my home city. And I'm going to try to have a discussion that's actually relevant to Israeli planners, but I also need to provide a lot of background for people who are not Israeli planners. So, first of all, let's start with the existing conditions in the Tel Aviv region, the existing urban rail map of the Tel Aviv region. Here it is. As you can see, this Tel Aviv urban rail map has certain advantages. First of all, it did not cost money to build this. Second, it is a very simple map. Every person in Israel knows that this is a map. It's not confusing. Third, it doesn't have any awkward features, for example, two lines intersecting without a transfer. Now, against these advantages of this Tel Aviv urban rail map, certain disadvantages must be weighed. For example, there's no urban rail service, and therefore public transport has to rely on very slow, very unreliable, very confusing buses. And so the Tel Aviv region has understood that it has such a problem for generations. Um, and in fact, planning for some kind of Tel Aviv urban rail goes back to around the time of Israeli independence, or I believe shortly after. I think it was still in the 1940s, not even the 50s. And Israel's first prime minister, the deeply overrated David Ben Gurion, um, slapped away the plan. Now, bear in mind, late 1940s Tel Aviv was not a large city, and I don't think it would have penciled out, but even plans involving light rail, or at the time would just have been streetcars, or some kind of mainline rail, some kind of commuter rail based solution that were maybe lower cost, these were all swatted away because Ben Gurion was anti urban. He believed that cities were somehow immoral. Also, Tel Aviv at the time did not vote for his party, for what is now the Labour Party. It voted for various centrist and center-right middle-class liberals. And so he instead favored. Oh, there was one in the 1930s already, because I know that there were plans. There was supposed to be a national plan in the 40s, and Ben Gurion said no because he wanted to disperse the population. He did not enjoy the idea of large cities. He preferred there to be a more even population dispersal with the kibbutz movement as the vanguard. He practiced what he preached. He, after retirement from politics, he moved to some random random place in the Negev called Sde Boker. This also had the racial dimension. The periphery of Israel at the time had an Arab demographic majority, so the idea was to eat various working class Jews there for some kind of facts on the ground. But again, it was not just Ben Gurion being racist, although Ben Gurion was racist. He was just anti-urban. And the city grew, and its transport problems became worse over time. They started building a city center. They even built a skyscraper called Shalom Meir Tower. I'm going to try to see if you can find it on Google Earth. Problem is, there's a kind of bullshit idea. It's not this one. There's kind of bullshit idea that it's a security problem to have very uh very precise mapping of Israel, and so there's some kind of writer in the United States that forbids having very high resolution satellite photos of Israel. Not of the United States, just of Israel. In the United States, it will not pass because planners would say, "Hey, we need this for surveillance purposes." Um, so they built a skyscraper, and they even built a uh, subway station supposedly in the basement, but no subway. This was the 1960s. And again, they kept planning. Um, and here's the thing. So this is something very important to understand about Israel. Um, This is especially going to be important if you're thinking about Israel as like a European country, which it very much isn't. So first of all, this is the population pyramid. Um, Israel has by far the highest birth rate in the developed world. I believe Israel has the only first world middle class that is above fertility. Now, it's not three. Three is mostly very religious people, but but secular Jews are something like 2.1 or 2.2, and that's regardless of education. Whereas people with that education level in Europe and the US are, I think, maybe a little bit over one, maybe 1.5. So this is the population growth. It's partly due to immigration. So, for example, you see the kink here. Let me see if you can actually see the kink there. Yes, you can. So the kink here is the fall of the Soviet Union. It brought in a wave of Soviet Jews. And likewise, right after independence, there were waves of immigration from um, uh, I think by 1949, all of the Holocaust survivors had already had already made Aliyah, but there was a wave of Middle Eastern and North African Jewish migration. The hostility between Jews and Arabs within mandatory Palestine in the 20s and 30s leaked into the rest of the Middle East and North Africa region, and this situation kept getting worse and worse for them, and kind of the big wave was right after Israeli independence. But it's also perfect. So Israel maybe would be planning in the 1960s, but the population today is 4 times as high. And this is going to be a theme with the planning in Tel Aviv. Now, in the 1990s, a mayor was elected in Tel Aviv named Roni Milo. Technically right wing, technically Likud. The man he was facing, Avigdor Kalani, was technically Labor, but Roni Milo was about the most moderate Likud person ever, and ended up after leaving the mayoralty, he founded a secular center party that ended up being pretty loyally center to center left. And likewise, Kahalani ended up bolting Labor and founding a party called Third Way, a center party that was even had slight center right flavors. So again, not an ideological left versus right election, but Milo promised that if he were elected, then he would work on building a subway in Tel Aviv. This was a big topic in 1990s Israel. At the time, the media, I think, at the time, the media was kind of like first discovering also the concept of high-speed rail. People started hearing that there were trains in Japan and in France that went 300 kilometers an hour. And at the time, there was also modernization of the mainline rail network in Israel. So the railways were kind of very, I don't want to say third world because India is third world and doesn't have a colonial system where it's often poor to interior and not very strong connections between major cities. The original north-south main line was horrifically wavy line that passed through what is now the West Bank and was horrifically curvy. And the current line from Tel Aviv to Haifa is in 1950s bypass. It's this one, and you might be able to see on the map that there's through service. This only opened in the 90s. So the freeway Ayalon opened in conjunction with the railway. It's a 3-track railway. They're adding a fourth or planning to add a fourth. I cannot tell. And beforehand, trains from the south terminated here. Trains from the north terminated here. So there is rail through the city, but I would not call this urban rail. It is not an S-Bahn. It does not have S-Bahn service quality. So I think they're aware of the concept and trying to get there. They only just electrified this. So this was always high platform, but they only just electrified this. They're in the process of doing national electrification. They're the most important line, which is again Ayalon. I'm forgetting when it opened the electrification, maybe 2 years ago, maybe last year. and they're trying to run more frequently, but it's not. But for example, none of the branches is especially frequent, and they're under the impression that on a double-track mainline railway they cannot run more than 14 trains an hour. And I've heard of a planner at Israel Railways who was surprised to hear that German S-Bahns, not segregated metros, but things like the Munich S-Bahn, could do 24 or even 30. And so, or French RER is the same. And so they're not exploiting it to the maximum. I would not call this urban rail. In the same way that I might call Sydney City Rail urban rail. And I'm mentioning Sydney not because it's a random example. Sydney, up until very recently, was technically the largest first world city outside the United States with no metro system, but it had had an S-Bahn going back to, I believe, 1912. Tel Aviv does not have that. So if you go on the major agglomerations of the world, yeah, some of them are in developing countries but still have subways. So Guangzhou, I mean, it's not Guangzhou, I mean, it's Guangzhou and Shenzhen, and these are not suburbs of each other. They're just two cities that are adjacent. They have many subway systems. Tokyo, Shanghai, Delhi, even Jakarta and Manila are building out. They're underdeveloped on this, but they're building out metro systems. Um, the largest city that has no metro is Dhaka. They're building one at extraordinarily high cost. I think Lagos, same thing. No metro building one. Karachi doesn't have an S-Bahn either. This is important. There's something called the Karachi Circular Railway, but it's moving in and out between open and closed, and it's never been as much of an S-Bahn as the Mumbai Suburban Railway. And again, these are all in poor countries, and in rich countries, the highest that you're going to get as we keep going down is going to be, I believe it's going to be Dallas without, if it's no subway. So Boston has a subway, San Francisco, of course, Toronto, Philly, Dallas. Yeah, so Dallas has light rail. Now, it's a flimsy light rail system. It has, I think, 150,000 riders a day, and this is how big the city is, the region is. They're very park and ride oriented. They're very large but very low ridership system, and then it's just going to be more American cities. Houston, same thing, light rail but no subway. Miami actually does have, it's not a subway, it's elevated, but Miami does have rapid transit, but again, very low ridership. And again, all of this is just American stuff. Milan, of course, has a subway. Is Dubai a first world city? Is kind of a questionable debate. It's rich. In many other ways, it's not first world. But also Dubai has rapid transit at this point. Atlanta has a two-line subway. Detroit is the largest with no subway and no light rail. It has a people mover that's not really transit. It's just a small single track loop in downtown Detroit. I would not call it either a subway or light rail. And then Tel Aviv is not going to be that far away. So as I said, Sydney used to be technically the biggest outside the US with no metro system, but it has had an S-Bahn since forever. And we're going to keep going down. This is already down to 5 million. Köln and Düsseldorf have an S-Bahn, a combined S-Bahn. They also have multiple subway systems. I'm going to get to in a bit to talk about the light rail. And Phoenix light rail, but no subway. Berlin obviously has a very large subway system, large commuter rail network. Seattle light rail, it's partly underground. Tampa, I really don't like how how big they're saying Tampa is. It's they're combining way too many things. I disagree with putting Tampa this big, but also America. Montreal has a subway. Kuwait, again, is one of these. Is it really a developed city? Again, rich. They're also building a metro system, I believe, pretty high cost. And now and eventually as we're going to go down, I mean, all of these things, if they're in even mildly rich countries like Busan, there are subways. Is Busan like as transit oriented as well? Absolutely not. It has multiple subway lines. And eventually we're going to get to our prize, the largest city in the developed world, not Athens, not Rome, but how small do you think Tel Aviv is? Now I'm starting to be concerned. Okay, yeah, they're saying it's 3 million. It's wrong. It's about 4. This is the largest city in the developed world outside the United States with no urban rail system. And this again is understood as a problem. This is not something that I'm revealing to Israel or some kind of, and it's not even something that's a very radical notion, right? I'm saying that Israel should withdraw from all of the settlements and consent to a Palestinian state within the borders of what was occupied by Jordan and Egypt between 49 and 67. That's a radical. That is regardedly kind of a radical position. If I'm saying Tel Aviv needs a subway, that's not. And that's going to feel, and that's important for the metro law that Israel is trying to pass right now. But as I said, fast population growth, the stuff they planned in the 90s, was a combo of metro and light rail, to the point that when they say metro in Israel, they're discounting that. So thankfully, one of my mutuals, Elad, made a crayon map. It's not crayon, it's the official crayon. So this is the map of the urban rail that is being planned. So let's drop the metro for a moment. This is the light rail. Now, this is Israeli views is not a metro because it is partly underground, partly above ground, and the map does not tell you which parts are which. So the red line, so these are just colors. So this is the red line. It's the one that's supposed to open either this year or the next. It's been under construction since 2011. Yeah, exactly. Tel Aviv. I mean, if you do the Tel Aviv district and the districts of Israel are the interesting part. I mean, interesting. I don't think they have any government, but they're just places on a map. So yeah, Tel Aviv. So Central District is 2.2. Tel Aviv is 1.4. So combined, they're going to be with this and this 3.6. And there are a handful of things that are not there that are still suburbs of Tel Aviv. Like there are like some of the Tel Aviv suburbanization, like Ashdod. I mean, it's not going to be on the metro, but Ashdod has what could be pretty good commuter rail service to Tel Aviv, and is legally in the south. So we're talking close to 4 million people either way. And so the red line is the one that's about to open. The map does not make it clear what's underground and what's above ground. The underground part is between roughly here at the Tel Aviv to Jaffa historic boundary and a little past the branch point. This is a surface branch. This was not supposed to even run in service. This was just supposed to be the rail yard, the depot, but they figured, oh, we can also run service there. This is kind of weird because usually this kind of combined light rail and subway networks branch on the surface just because there's far more capacity underground than above ground, so you might as well branch. Here it's kind of it's a branch in not on a map, but it's in planning a branch. Half the trains are going. There are facilities here to turn half the trains, and the other half will continue into Bat Yam. Green line. You might think that all of this is subway now. Only the central parts of this are subway, and I believe it's also true of the purple line. So you might notice this kind of a triangle around city center. I would quibble with some of the alignments. For example, I think that they should have made more effort to have the central bus station, which is here, be a transfer point, so like move the Green Line a little here, but again, it's water under the bridge at this point. Um, and and again, all of these are going to run relatively short trains because they're going to have to run in light rail mode on the surface outside the center. And this leaves kind of poor taste in the mouth of many Israelis because, and if for justifiable reasons, it's kind of a small city type system. I say small city, Frankfurt has the same thing, and as I mentioned, Köln and Düsseldorf. This, in many ways, a very German system, which is kind of weird because, I mean, there's German influence on Israel is completely not weird at all. There are many ways in which Israel it's an outgrowth of Germany, which is a lot of these things are things I didn't even notice until I moved to Berlin. About how certain staple consumer goods that I thought were Israeli, I mean, they are Israeli, but there may be modifications, but a lot of them have very obvious German antecedents. For example, cottage cheese. So cottage cheese is not just Israeli and it's not just German. It's consumed in the United States, it's consumed in Sweden, but understanding that they're not very often consumed, they're not considered staples, whereas in Israel, literally the price of cottage cheese was used as a proxy for populist complaints about rising living costs in the early 2010s. And I was all, well, actually, here in the United States, the cost of cottage is exactly the same or even a little bit higher than what you're complaining about. Well, I mean, since then I've moved through Germany, and in Germany the costs are a lot lower than the prices at the supermarket. Or even random Israeli sweets, like for example this one. Um, this this is technically Israeli, but there are very similar things in Germany. Okay, I mean I can go to a supermarket and buy something again maybe bigger, maybe not quite the same, but very similar. Um, uh, the education system in Israel is essentially what you do if you take the German education system, you put socialists in charge of it, but you also severely underfund it. The class system with the gymnasium and the vocational schools that has been blurred in Israel. It has not been fully leveled, but it's been blurred from that origin. Um, and not, for example, maybe a more it's not, for example, a more egalitarian version of the American school system. It's a more egalitarian, but also, unfortunately, very poorly funded variant on the German system. The first university in Israel, the Technion, was founded as a German research university. So again, very deep German influence on Ashkenazi Israel. Ashkenazi Israel is about half of Jewish Israel, and it's the more politically, economically, and culturally dominant half. So stuff like engineering could be German, and of course, it is not something that even modern Israel would resist because German engineering has high reputation. Much of this reputation is deserved. I think people do overrate German engineering, but it is not bad. It is it is overrated in the sense that it is good engineering that people think as like divine engineering, which it isn't. So this kind of German influence on Israel, in a way, it's not surprising. The thing that surprises me is that it coexists with total indifference to how to do good S-Bahn scheduling. This is probably my biggest complaint. It's not about how they're building the metro. It's not about how they're building the light rail. It's how they're building, or rather not building, the mainline rail system. So the light rail, again, this is something. This combo of light rail and metro is how German cities, with the exceptions of Berlin, Hamburg, München, and Nuremberg, run their urban subways. So a very good source in this is Alexander Rack's timelines. He has a website that, due to his rail fanishness, I guess, has, with 5-year periods, a map of every rapid transit system in the world. There are some quibbles about what should count as rapid transit, but those mixed systems, they're called Stadtbahn in Germany. they do count. So that would be, for example, let's do Hanover, or so let's do Hannover, okay? Let's also look at uh, the Rhine-Ruhr, so Düsseldorf, the region, all combined. Let's look at Frankfurt, uh, Frankfurt, and let's look at Stuttgart. These are the main Stadtbahn systems of Germany. So Hannover, I don't know how clearly you can see this, and if it is somehow unclear, then this is the URL. So surface segments are thin, and subway segments are thick. So we have here in Hannover 3 lines that meet in one central point, and then they all branch on the surface. Again, you should branch on the surface because that matches the capacity. You can just run much more frequently in a subway than on the surface. So this is the Hannover system, again, 3 lines. Stuttgart is more complex. It's a bunch of lines, and if you're wondering where the green line is the S-Bahn. So these are commuter trains. And the blue line, again, it's a combo, and some lines go in and out between being rapid transit and being streetcars. Frankfurt is also kind of complex. I believe it's 3 independent lines. This. And again, on the surface, maybe you have this trunk segment, but mostly they just branch. And again, an S-Bahn. And then the most complex is the Rhine-Ruhr, just because it's a bunch of cities that are all in the same place. And so they just connect with each other. The commuter rail systems combined into one system. So this is the largest of them. It's Köln, which again is a system where it's not as simple as 3 lines and each of them branches. The lines branch and recombine in more complicated ways. It's a much more difficult system to grasp than Tel Aviv's current system. And orange is commuter rail. And you can see in the smaller cities, you can see maybe more easily graspable. So 2 lines here in Düsseldorf, then the system in Duisburg. There's Bochum, Essen, and Dortmund. Dortmund is just the same kind of 3 lines meeting in a triangle system that is so common. It's how Tel Aviv is planning. Just inland, so it doesn't have the kind of loop-de-loop on the purple line. And again, they branch on the surface. And I bring all of this up because that by itself is not stupid. Other things about this are stupid. Chief of which is this. The Tel Aviv Light Rail was planned for a much smaller metropolitan region. It was planned for a metropolitan region of maybe 2 million or 2.5, and now it's pushing 4. An important feature of the Stadtbahn is that the trains are small because they're supposed to run in tramway mode on the surface. And if they run in tramway mode, they cannot be very long. The trains have to be capped by, let's say, the length of a block. In practice, I think the outer limit is 40-something meters, maybe 47 meters, maybe 50. Now, you can run a metro system with very small trains like this. This is increasingly common in Italy, is how Italy builds new metros. This is also how Copenhagen built its metro. It's how Vancouver is building part of its metro. But this is because it uses driverless operations, which are extremely frequent. So you can maybe have trains that are only 50 meters long, but they run every minute, 30 seconds. And so you still have very high capacity. And this is the kind of Italian system on the more recent lines. It's really useful for limiting construction costs because the electronics for driverless operations today are cheap, whereas the concrete to build big station boxes is expensive. Now, of course, if you're a very large city, you cannot exploit this. You have to run very frequently and have big trains. And if you're expanding an older metro line that was not built this way, then yeah, you need big trains. Bear in mind, Italian construction costs when they're expanding metro lines with big trains like Rome B2 are not expensive, are not terribly expensive either. But the real like the 100 million, the sub 100 million euros per kilometer lines in Italy are small trains. And the thing is, a Stadtbahn runs in the tramway. It runs in tramway mode on the surface. It cannot be driverless. They're trying to do this kind of awkward combination on the red line where it's supposed to run driverless underground, and then maybe a driver's supposed to get in here and then go, and then take the train down. So they're supposed to be running every minute 30 at rush hour on the trunk. And I don't know if it's actually going to work out. So it's kind of this awkward combination. And so as they have been building the red line, and as they approved the route of the green line, which required Mayor Ron Hulday to yell at the Minister of Transport, Israel Katz, to consent to a subway here. The green line was supposed to only run the subway around here, and the rest was supposed to run in tramway mode. It was supposed to be just a tram on this street called, technically it's supposed to be called Ibn Gabirol. However, nobody except prescriptivists call it this way. It's pronounced Evan Virol, not Ibn but Evan. And so on Evan Virol, so this is a wide boulevard that it's kind of one of the main streets of North Tel Aviv. It's that in Dizengoff. You might note that the purple line does not go under Dizengoff. It goes under a slightly less important main street of North Tel Aviv, Ben Yehuda. And so Ibn Gavir, and so Evan Virol is pretty wide. It's about 30 meters, which it's like a Manhattan Avenue, and in Tel Aviv that is considered wide, especially in the older parts of the city, like this. And this is a high density area. The population density here is called District 3. It's the limits of District 3, aka where I grew up, are from here to this street. So this is from Habima to the north, and then bounded by by Evan Gvirol and the river. And this is population density of about 16,000 people per square kilometer. If this were a city by itself, I believe it would be the third. I believe it would be the third densest in Israel after Bnei Brak here and Bat Yam here. So again, very dense. This area is almost as dense, but they made up something about how the area is not sufficiently high-rise to merit an underground system, and eventually the mayor yelled at the Minister of Transport until the Minister of Transport said okay to underground. So essentially, this is a mid-rise area. It's mostly especially west of Evan Gvirol, it's 4 stories mostly. Some taller buildings, but mostly 4 floors, just with high lot coverage, rather than towers in the park. So it's the green line, then the purple line. And the thing is, then they realized as they were building this, that this is not enough. The city keeps growing, the city needs a lot more, the region needs a lot more, the country needs a lot more. And that's where they figured, wait, this is light rail. What if we did full metro? And in come the metro plans. The metro plans are, so something you might notice about the light rail is that even when it's supposed to run underground, it's following streets very closely. I don't think they're cut and covering this. I think that it's deep bored, and I believe that this was also bundled with some kind of highway tunnel, with some short road tunnel. Israel loves bundling public transport with road investments, and this works exactly as poorly as they would expect. And with Ayalon, it's not even so. Ayalon is one example, but there are way worse examples. Ayalon is just center city through running, whereas then they've built branches in the medians of freeways. They've often built the freeway in conjunction with the railway. they keep building more and more railways in these medians, often at the same time as the freeway. So as an example, because the railways were not historically very well invested in, the development did not ever orient itself around the railway. So you might be able to tell that the railway here is kind of a dead zone between, for example, Ramat Sharon or Herzliya and Herzliya Pituach and Fash Mariah. This is about the richest part of Israel, more or less. This is also pretty wealthy. In general, the way Tel Aviv works is rich north, poor south. So it's not perfect. Holon is especially poor. Holon is like lower middle class. Bat Yam is pretty working class. Ramat Gan and Givatayim are middle class. Petah Tikva is mostly at this point where people live when they've been displaced out of Tel Aviv. Ramat Gan and Petah Tikva, not in Petah Tikva and Givatayim. This area is called Ramat Aviv. Quite wealthy. This area is a bunch of neighborhoods that I just call Ramat Hayal because it's the name of one of them. Also wealthy, and as is often the case for wealthy areas, that's where the edge cities are placed. So you might be able to tell that this, even at this resolution, you might be able to tell this area is industrial, and it's even called Ramat Hayal Industrial Zone. And what is the industry? Tech. This street, it's called Habarzel, is one of the streets that are identified most with the tech industry. And likewise, Ramat Sharon is very wealthy. Herzliya is quite middle class. Hod HaSharon, very middle class. Kfar Saba is also a little bit more traditional. There's not in the sense of religiously traditional, well, on the contrary, the sense of labor traditional. It's kind of a very rich people who vote labor and think that because their grandparents were on a kibbutz and pretended to be socialist. I mean, they thought of themselves as socialists. Well, either Arabs or more likely Yemeni Jews who they look down on did all the hard work, and that makes them not just rando rich people. Kfar Shmariah is basically a metonym for wealth at this point. Herzliya Pituach, this area, is very wealthy and also at this point an edge city. So quite a lot of tech jobs have suburbanized here as well. I shouldn't say have suburbanized. They were never. Yeah, exactly. So they were not. I shouldn't say suburbanized. It's not like the tech jobs were in the second left. No, the tech jobs as they were being created in the 1990s were being created in Ramat Hayal and in Herzliya Pituach. And so, and again, and you might know that all the town centers are away from the train, because the train was maybe for intercity service. And yeah, there's a way in which Herzliya Pituach is close to the train. It's transit adjacent, but not transit oriented. Look at the roadways here. They're enormous. Okay, I mean, I wouldn't even call them stroads. I think of stroads as very well developed arterials at automobile scale. This is not a well developed arterial. This is just a freeway segment. It's very short. So I don't know to what extent there are plans for sprawl repair. I doubt they're significant, unfortunately. And as Jonathan Rawson just mentioned, Road 431 and Road 531, they're designed with rail in the median. So this is a loop. But the worst thing you can do for network coherence, but they decide to do it anyway. So they created this branch that goes into Kfar Saba from the east of all places, and they figured, wait, we should also serve Ra'anana. And then they looped it back here, while also upgrading this road to a full freeway. Similar example is going to be in the south, Route 431. I think this freeway may have pre-existed, but as they kept on, so the traditional north-south railway does not go along the coast at all. In general, the pattern within Israel, and this is a multi-millennium thing, is that it's not usually normal for the main north-south transport artery to be near the sea. There's something called the Kingsway in the Bible, and the Kingsway is, I think, on the Jordan side of the Jordan River. And yeah, there's something called the Derech Hayam, the Seaway, and even that is not actually along the coast. Um, the old road is Route 4, and even that is a bypass. The older roads all passed through. They all passed through what is now the West Bank. The development 150 years ago was mostly not coastal. Jaffa was just the port for Jerusalem. Now, Jaffa did industrialize, so Jaffa did have a lot of its own development, and then there was Jaffa, and then there was Haifa, and then Zionism took place. Jewish development didn't follow where everyone had already been living. It was mostly it was mostly here. It was mostly on the coastal plain, and so this became the Jewish area. So this road was built as a Jewish road between, and not like an apartheid road, but like as a road designed to connect Haifa and Tel Aviv without having to deal with possible riots in a place like Nablus. This is why the border is where it is. Um, I mean, a lot of it was conquest, but there's kind of a core there that is based on pre-independence local demographic majorities. And so, as I said, the main railway from Tel Aviv to Haifa, or from Jaffa to Haifa, went like this, and then it went like this, and then finally they built the current one. And from Tel Aviv to the south, I mean, what is over the south? Jerusalem goes like this, and Beersheba, they didn't need to go along the coast. They went so the old road goes via the old railroad goes via Lod. So it's like this. And only recently did they build this to connect all these towns that they built near the coast. So things like Ashdod and Ashkelon, and then uh, building toward, and then building maybe another way toward Beersheba through all of this string of incredibly low-income towns. Ashkelon is pretty poor, and the rest are basically metonyms for poverty and unemployment. Places like Sderot. So it is also right next to the Gaza Strip, so it also is often a metonym for Hamas fires rockets on here. And nobody cares because it is a very poor area, so people only care when they want to go to war. Netivot, again, practically a byword for poverty and unemployment. Ofakim, same thing. Because, again, remember, the point was to disperse the population. If you disperse the population, well, the jobs are not going to be here, okay? Maybe agricultural jobs, but it's the 1950s already. Think for 5 seconds about what the future of mass farming as a job creation is. Just look at other peer rich countries and ask yourself if you can sustain an industrial economy with random towns like this, and the answer is obviously not. Yeah, you can build factories there, but these are also maybe not the highest value added things. Not to mention that often the factories are cited, if the factory is developed by, let's say, kibbutz, the kibbutz elite looks down on people in these towns, so they would place the factory outside the municipal limits. But they have built this line, and you might notice something, that the line, besides the fact that it's paired with a freeway, it does not enter city centers. They didn't plan the cities to have rail lines going through them, so the lines always serve the stations incredibly peripherally. So here's the route, for example. And there was no attempt to DoD this. Even in a place that's like Netanya. Netanya is not poor. Netanya is working to lower middle class, full of French Jews who are incredibly racist. Like they fled France because they saw a few too many Muslims there. Yes, there's development right here, but city center is here. So for example, you don't have little deviations, things like little tunnels into secondary centers, which are pretty common in Zurich, for example, in the Zurich region. And when they do build, they build these loops and they build them again with freeways or in the medians of freeways. This is probably the worst offense, 431, because there's so much development right around here. So when they built as far south as here, they built up until here. So all of this is Rishon LeZion, which is in theory, an independent city. Something like 200,000 people live there, but it's not a real independent city. It's just, I wouldn't call it development town, but basically a suburb. Um, and so there's Moshe Dayan here, and there is over here the station that they built that they punched in from the other direction, from via, I'm forgetting whether it's via, yeah, that's via, called Lishonim. This one. And what they should have done was connect them like this via city center, maybe with a short tunnel. Most of this could be elevated. This would also serve things like the College of Management. It would serve the residential areas much better because people don't live on the freeway, they live here. But they have not done so. They are doing it in the median of 431. So again, very poor planning, and this is not the metro again. This is, as I said, the worst thing about Israel is not the metro; it's the commuter trains. I mean, transportation-wise, there are many worse things about Israel that are not transportation-related. Things that can be seen every Jerusalem Day Hate March. And at any rate, so they're planning on a metro, and I don't want to show what they're doing. So it's this. So let's look at features of the metro that's being planned. So before we jump off to the critique, let's look at this. So it's 3 lines that are colored blue, pink, and I don't want to call it brown because there's a planned BRT line called the brown line. So let's call it, is this burnt sienna? Tan? Something like that. So the plan, first of all, you might know that, so first of all, these are full metro lines. They're intended to be driverless, which would give Tel Aviv one of the largest, not the largest, but one of the larger driverless metro systems in the world. I think the largest is by far Singapore at this point. And note also that they go much farther out than the light rail. They're designed around higher speed. They're designed around more regional use, not just Tel Aviv and the core and the core suburbs, the ones that have long been viewed as the ones that have long been viewed as part of the coordinated region with Tel Aviv. That would be Ramat Gan, Givatayim, maybe Petach Tikva, Holon, Bat Yam, Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak is weird because Bnei Brak, if I'm just showing you a map of the urban area, you would not notice the difference, but Bnei Brak is uniquely Haredi. And there is, to a good approximation, no integration of Haredis into Israeli society. It's the Haredis and the Arabs, which does not just mean that they're different. Sure, they're different. I mean, the settlers are also different, but national religious people are pretty well integrated. They have different political views on matters like driving on Saturday. For some of them, like Bnei Akiva, they might have different views from much of mainstream society about the desirability of assassinating the prime minister if he exchanges land for peace. But they live nearby. They work with secular Jews. And with Haredis, it's not quite. I mean, Haredi women do work, but and then they got exposed to mainline Jewish Israel, but it's not out of feminism that they work. It's considered shameful almost to work. You do this because you need to support your husband, who is a Torah student, who is a lifelong yeshiva student, and of course, you can't have an entire society of yeshiva students. About half of Haredi men work, and it's all under the table because of various political compromises that give them an exemption from military service. Business, and of course, Israel is a highly, highly militarized society. If you don't do military service, it's because you're maybe a religious woman, but then you do civilian national service, which for them is like serves the same kind of national cohesive purpose. Or you're Haredi or you're Arab, or you're just from a very poor background and you just didn't really care for it, and the military figured it would be too difficult to bring you in, or in very rare cases, it's like my history. I mean, I left at 12, but I mean, a lot of people would have come back and I didn't. I.e., people who just seriously think the occupation is bad. Like, that's I mean, that's not the main way to not do military service, and basically any other purpose for not doing military service kind of excludes you from polite society. This is also excludes you from polite society, but then there are parts of polite society that are more left wing, as well. And so not a lot of social integration. They travel in very different ways. So, for example, they don't travel to the same places. They don't work at the same places. Their travel needs are more about traveling to other Haredi places, to the point that I believe the top intercity pair for the intercity travel pair, I think by bus, is Bnei Brak to Jerusalem. Jerusalem being a mixed city, but it has a very large Haredi population as well. And apparently there's more Bnei Brak Jerusalem travel than, let's say, Tel Aviv Jerusalem or Tel Aviv Haifa. They also, for example, they travel in large families, and this means that certain planning shortcuts, like having people walk longer to faster, more frequent service, they just stay on the bus. So a lot of planning excludes them, sometimes intentionally, out of the fact that they're also very denigrated by the mainstream, but also the fact that there's a lot of both actual segregation and self-segregation involved. But even then, as far as urban planning would go, it would be understood to be part of the same region, just kind of, they wouldn't say ethnically, but religiously, and what we think about segregation would call ethnically is very different. So anyway, it's not just these areas. So Holon, Bat Yam, Ramat Gan, Givatayim, Tel Aviv, Bnei Brak, Petah Tikva, maybe Ramat Hasharon, maybe Herzliya, maybe. It's not just these. You might notice. So yeah, the green line penetrates into Herzliya Pituach, where it's supposed to. And the purple line penetrates pretty far east and southeast toward places like or Yehuda, places like that. And yet, these penetrate far more. The blue line, the most urban of them, is essentially what could have, like, back when I was crayoning, before the roads were set in stone, I was crayoning something like this as a line alongside these. But it goes further. You might know it goes deeper into Petah Tikva. It serves also the center of Petah Tikva, which is on here. This is kind of peripheral to Petah Tikva, the road of the red line. Then you have the burnt sienna line, M1, which goes very deep into the south, into with a bunch of branches into Rishon, Nes Ziona, Rehovot, then Ramle and Lod, and very deep into the north, serving the centers of Ra'anana and Kfar Saba, the one that the main lane rail should have served but doesn't, and also the historic center of Herzliya. I shouldn't call this the center of Herzliya because Herzliya Pituach is a much bigger node at this point. And then the circumferential line, the pink line, orbits at a pretty hefty radius from Herzliya Pituach through the very end of the green line, the red line, the purple line, going almost to the airport with the branch, and then yeah, sure, Holon, Bat Yam. But so notice this goes much farther. They're also, I think, supposed to be deepward, so they're much more independent of the street grid. Also note that they're not really paying attention to transfers. Remember how I said that the empty map has the benefit of not having missed connections? Well, here they have missed connections. This is a made connection. It's not missed, but note how how M2 here. Again, even though it's all supposed to be deepward, it's not actually going to be. It's not going to be very good for transferring to the red or the green line in the center of Tel Aviv or here in Manchia. And this is just bad planning. So there is bad planning. I hope they fix this. Also, this just might be me being obsessed, but pretty sure this should at least during maybe M1 through Central Bus Station. M1 and the Green Line again, not very close. Here, note that the map does depict the stations, and even though they share right of way for a little bit, the stations are distinct. And then pink line, it's a circumferential. It's really important to make all the transfers. Okay, sure. Huh? Okay, 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 okay. Maybe. So you see the problem. So there is some planning drunkenness involved in here. So they do have that problem. Now the main problem, however, is not technical. The main problem, and this is a very big topic as we speak. Like it's been a big topic for the last week or so. It's something called the Metro Law. So what is the Metro Law? The Metro Law is essentially an Israeli equivalent of a Déclaration d'utilité publique. So first of all, I need to tell you what the situation is, and then I need to tell you what the Déclaration d'utilité publique is, and then I need to tell you why it's relevant. So the situation is the metro is an enormous project. I'm forgetting the cost. My recollection is that, okay, no, not this. This is silly. When is this from? So this is from 2018. They're saying that the cost is estimated at 150 billion shekels, which is in PPP terms about $40 billion, maybe 40 something billion dollars. And this is a sizable system. Okay. You're just not going to tell me how long this is. Wait, you are going to tell me how long this is. So remember M1 is very long. So this is how long it is. So this is very high cost, but look at the length. This is a big system. I think this is 150 kilometers. I mean, yeah, it's not terrible cost for 150 kilometers. Maybe I would object a little bit because it's 150 kilometers. They're very suburban, and so their cost should be lower. But I mean, when I think suburban, I mean, don't conjure images of empty fields. Much of it is, yeah, it's suburban, but it's stuff like going in the center of Ra'anana under Ahuzah, like the street, or the center of Herzliya. So, I mean, yeah, it should be less, but I mean, it should be 30 billion, not 15. And again, this is the cost of as of 2020, I guess. So I bring this up because $40 billion. So it will have connections because so the connections are going to be better. Okay, that's good to know because the map has some connections that look like misses, or maybe not misses, but very long walks. Like it's Paris or something. And at any rate, this is also a map on Wikipedia if people want an official map and not a dynamic real-time map. They even have the stations labeled. And again, through all of the centers of these towns are not served by mainline rail. So things like Ra'anana, again, this is Ahuzah. Herzliya with something called Reichman, or the Interdisciplinary Center. And the upshot of all of this is, you see, this is not quite linking. And the thing is, this is an enormous project. $40 billion in Israel is a lot of money. I mean, $40 billion in the United States is a lot of money. The United States is, first of all, richer than Israel by a lot, and second, has 330 million people. Israel has 9. Okay? So if you're watching this and you're American, then forgetting GDP per capita for a moment, scale the size of the Tel Aviv Metro like this. It is the equivalent of a $1.5 trillion project. This makes it um, similar in size to the entire package of the bipartisan infrastructure framework, and that's without taking into account that the United States is rich relative to GDP. It's about comparable to the entire Build Back Better Act, and it's just one project. So yes, this is going to be on the agenda, and it's going to take a while to build. They're talking about building it mostly in the 30s, and it's also hotly debated at the highest level, at the highest political level. Um, it's just going to be such a large proportion of Israeli government spending that, yeah, it's not something that the professionals just do. And this means that there's enormous surface area for surplus extraction or surplus destruction because it's such a big and political project, which again, it has to be that every NIMBY can make claims. And this is the problem. So the main bone of contention is Ra'anana. Now, I have family in Ra'anana. I have cousins who grew up there. Um, this is basically your standard upper middle class. I won't say white flight or Ashkenazi flight, but something similar to that kind of suburb. Also, and usually remember how I said that Kfar Saba is a little bit traditional in the sense of, oh, my great grandparents or my grandparents built this country for the Labour Party, and those awful Mizrahi Likudniks stole it from us. So there's that mentality, and in um, Ra'anana is also very Ashkenazi, but Ra'anana does not have the same labor ranks. It's more centrist or even center right. For example, Ra'anana closes on Saturdays, where Tel Aviv does not. Out of something about the sensibilities of religious people. I forget where the prime minister Yair Lapid lives. I think Tel Aviv, but the one before him, um, Naftali Bennett, kind of the epitome of kind of uh, neoliberal, but also religious, just Norby center right. He lives in Ra'anana, and Ra'anana is very heavily NIMBY. Not just about this, they're also anti-housing. And they've kept making complaints about the route through their town because they're worried about, I don't even remember what they're worried about, whether it's the depot or it's about or stations making the town more accessible to people who cannot afford a car or construction noise. It doesn't really matter. They're NIMBYing the project. Um, and it's understood that they can keep making demands and be very noisy about it. And yeah, the legal system does not empower NIMBYs very much, but the political system might. This is the same in Israel as in, for example, the United States. The United States does not empower NIMBYs. I mean, the state fights back, the state wins. The issue is does the state have the political will to fight back when a member of the state legislature, let's say it's a safe state, so the state legislators don't think like representatives of a party or a faction, but of a small district, and the district and the people who are most so represented are people who are connected with the district, so very local people who have lived there for a long while. They own, even if it's a more urban area, they're likely to be homeowners rather than renters. They're very local social networks, and these tend to be the NIMBYs. And in Israel, it's not the same. I mean, the Knesset is multi-party and national, and yet there is surface area for this kind of NIMBYism. So it's understood that they're going to be able to make whatever bullshit demand, and it's going to be difficult for the state to fight back politically. This is the early commitment problem. This is not a project you didn't just do without planning because you need to plan. It's a complex plan, and even the planning budget. I mean, it's a few percent of the overall cost, but even that is significant. Um, and by the way, Ha'it just is a linguistic note. Itztadion is just the Hebrew word for stadium. It's just back in the day, it's a borrowing from Greek that's so old that back then Hebrew did not have consonant clusters. So in the same way that in Spanish they put they do prothesis with e. So instead of saying So, for example, the Arab name, I think it's Arab name, Slim is barred as Eslin. Instead of stadion, they said Istadion. So this is just stadium stadium. At any rate, so in Israel, it's not a project this big. You have to commit to it. So to avoid problems of early commitment, which are going to lead to a massive cost overrun, because it's very difficult to just say no. Once the plan has been committed to, if Ra'anana wants to make enormous demands, it's going to be difficult to say no. We're not going to build M1. Maybe, possibly, they're going to be able to say, okay, we're going to cut some parts of it. But I mean, we're not going to cut Herzliya Center. So what? They're just going to curtail to the interdisciplinary center, and then not connect to Ra'anana to the Ra'anana train station. That's just weird. And so that gives the NIMBYs power, the early commitment, and it's going to lead to cost overruns. So they're trying to short circuit that using something that is called in Hebrew it's called Chok HaMetro. Literally, it means the Metro Law, which essentially enshrines the plan. Enshrines. That's right. In law, in order to give the state a better legal footing to fight back against NIMBYs. It also is a kind of political statement to give the state better political footing to fight back against NIMBYs, to make sure that the planners, that the people who drew the crayon that said M1 is going to do this, M2 is going to do this, M3 is going to do this, those people, the ones who drew crayon, they're not politicians, they're civil servants, they're engineers, maybe consultants helped, but this is owned by the civil service. And the civil service needs to know that its bosses, aka the Knesset, support it. And this is where the concept that in French is called déclaration d'utilité publique comes in. So this is a system this is a debate closing system. So in Spain, they're the harshest about this. You have 2 months to object to a plan, and then forever hold your peace. In Germany, they're way NIMBY friendlier. It's the same 2 months and 2 months or object, but 2 months are only time to register that you're going to object later, and you don't need to even outline what the objection is going to be. So in the 2-month window, you say, I'm going to object, and then in the subsequent year, you find some bad faith argument, some kind of you find that there's some kind of endangered species within a radius that you can convince a judge matters, where maybe the reason you oppose the project, as happened with the gigafactory that Elon Musk has been trying to build in the suburbs of Berlin, it got delayed by about a year, as an eco-fascist organization based not in the area but in Bavaria, sued on specious grounds because they did not want there to be more jobs for Polish immigrant workers. I mean, at this point, new manufacturing jobs are not being created for Germans. Germans are trying to avoid them, and they're trying to upskill to white collar or at least to intermediate jobs like teaching, nursing, lab techs. Germany has very low unemployment, so lots of migrant workers, mostly from the rest of the EU, also from the Middle East, and the extreme right, and that eco-fascist organization is affiliated with the extreme right, not even center right, are unhappy. Thankfully, everyone in Germany is unhappy that the extreme right even exists. So this is where the approval process gets delayed, and when the approval process gets delayed, it gives the NIMBYs power to make demands, and usually the demands boil down to a more expensive project. For example, in Brussels, I think it's M3, they they're building the line, and it's being built through in part a working class area, and they're in order to reduce construction costs, they're staging stations in city parks. It's pretty common. They do it in Istanbul. They did it in Milan. They staged early stations under the various piazze in the city center. In Stockholm, they deep mine the stations, but they stage the mezzanines under parks where they can, just to avoid traffic disruption under streets. But then for 2 years, you don't have the city park. And in Brussels, the residents complained that that the government is being racist and classist and insufficiently social, and why are they not listening? And if they had made any other complaint than this being Belgium, they would be told that they should be thankful that they're not all being deported. Belgium is not racist. However, because it's a NIMBY complaint, it's not making a serious political claim for equality. It just makes a complaint. It's not even quite about money. It's not that they're demanding a welfare system that would be good for immigrants and their descendants. They're demanding something. They're demanding something very petty, and that's when the state says, okay, let's slow this down and think. And when you slow down and think, yeah, things are going to not just take longer, but also be more expensive. So the Déclaration d'utilité publique is a short circuit. It's a way of saying, yes, we approved it, deal. I think the translation for this into English is homologation. Now, homologation is not a word that I have ever heard used by a native English speaker. It is Euro English. It just means approval, but it specifically means that the state has decided that this shall be built. And once that's done, that closes the debate. It is done in France on major projects like TGV lines, like Grand Paris Express. They do the system in order to prevent last minute lawsuits, to disempower NIMBYs to at least some extent. Now, I'm not saying that they perfectly disempowered NIMBYs in France, unfortunately, and the NIMBYs in Provence were sufficiently powerful to prevent the construction of a mostly above ground high-speed line behind the mountains, and instead they forced a mostly underground line closer to the sea at very high cost, to the point that most of the line will just not be built, but it will be medium speed. And but there is much weaker NIMBYism in France and, for example, in Germany, where the restrictions on people's ability to launch nuisance lawsuits are weaker. They favor the NIMBYs more. And again, all of this is political and not legal. In Germany, as in the United States, as in Israel, if the state wants your property, wants to expropriate your property for some kind of public project, it can do it. It pays market rate. Maybe it pays a hair higher because of negotiations, but it can expropriate your property. That's not the hard part. France, same thing. Israel, honestly, same thing. It's just a political thing. Can you complain until some politician from either the ruling party or the official opposition with enough power says, these people make a good point. And what is being done with the Metro Law? Well, the Metro Law is being held up. Now, why is it being held up? It's not because it is unpopular. To the contrary, a majority of members of Knesset want it to pass. They've said they would vote for it if it came on the agenda. Now, this is not some kind of majority thing. It's common in the United States that a law that would pass on the floor and Congress is not being brought up because the majority party mostly does not want it, so it's only a handful of moderates who would vote for it. For example, when Justice Scalia died, the Republicans had, I believe, 54 or 55 Senate seats out of 100. But many of them were pretty moderate people who would vote in favor of an Obama nominee were the nominee not very left-wing. But the majority of the Republican Party did not want to confirm any Obama nominee. So Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell just said, no, we're not even going to hold a vote. Doesn't matter who Obama nominates. And then they waited for Trump to win, and then they confirmed the Trump nominee, Neil Gorsuch. And so this is not what's happening in Israel. The coalition mostly supports the bill. The parties currently pushing hardest for it are coalition parties. These are Labour, and these are Israel Beitenu. That is a party that was founded by Avigdor Lieberman as he left the Bibi orbit in the 1990s, early 2000s, as more right-wing alternative for Russian immigrants. There was already such a center-to-center-right Russian interest party called Israel Ba'aliyah by by Natan Sharansky, or maybe you've heard of him as Anatoly Sharansky. He was a very famous political prisoner in the Soviet Union for being too Zionist. And then with the Soviet Union, and then I'm forgetting whether when the Soviet Union fell or a little bit earlier, he made it to Israel. And Lieberman started a party that was to the right of that and used early national conservative, including anti-Arab rhetoric. And this became the main Russian party, and it became one of the main, just ordinarily right of Likud party. It was Lieberman and Mafdal and various successors. At this point, it's called Yamina, and it is Bennett's party. But there have always been concerns about, are you just going to be red meat for Likud base? Are you going to be a center-right alternative that's just not bootlicking Bibi? Lieberman was, owing to his Russian roots and to preferences of his voters, very secular and anti-religious. And due to conflict with the Haredi parties, he ended up leaving Netanyahu's coalition in 2019 and became independent and eventually joined the center-left coalition as kind of the most right-wing element, but still. So it started as very secular right, but as he left the Netanyahu coalition, a lot of people who were against Netanyahu but had center-right views flocked to him. And for example, there's something called the liberal movement, or the new liberal movement in Israel. It's just kind of the usual annoying libertarians, often with the same bullshit that you see from American libertarians, not the Ron Paul kind, not the quasi-fascists, but the ones that are, for example, Reason, Cato, the ones who are the more normal ones, but still with certain hang-ups. And in one of the magazines called Liberal, literally in their first issue, they put a picture of Lieberman. They were trying to insinuate themselves into that party, and to a certain extent, they succeeded. Now, Lieberman does have corruption problems that they're aware of. So they're kind of inserting themselves into Israel Beitanu as the kind of non-Hebrew speaking monolingual Russians are dying out, or even Yamina. Bennett kind of made the party much more conventionally, economically right-wing than it had been before. So anyway, Israel Beitanu supports this. It's kind of a matter of national development. Labor supports this. And Labor is where the Minister of Transport is. The Minister of Transport, Mirav Michaeli, she's the head of Labor. Now, the senior partner in what is left of the coalition, Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid, mostly also supports it, but it self-supports it. And the thing is, as I mentioned, it's surface area. So the Ra'anana NIMBYs, their problem is that they just don't want to build for NIMBY reasons. And the thing is, Ra'anana has middle-class, economically center-right voters who Yesh Atid is looking after. And so there's enough ties there that Yesh Atid is softening it. It's known as, bear in mind, if it came to a vote, pretty much everyone in Yesh Atid would vote yes. The issue is even more political drama. The Knesset is currently in an election period. They just voted for it for an election period, and the problem is that so a lot of things right now require the consent of Likud, the largest party in the Knesset by far and senior partner in the opposition. Likud did not want the Metro Law, which I believe it's not because they particularly care about it. I believe it's just a corruption deal that they're trying to. They figure that the coalition wants the Metro Law, so they're going to be against it in order to trade it for some horse. And Yesh Atid needs or feels like it needs Likud's consent for various moves as the election period intensifies. The election is going to be in October. That it's just not going to put the bill up for a vote without Likud's agreement. So there were So they were trying to put the Metro Law up to a vote before the formal vote to dissolve the Knesset and go to early elections. Um, and that, again, did not happen because of what is essentially a horse trade. Again, it's not like Yeshidid agreed to shelve the law in exchange for something. It's that Likud demanded something to not throw a fit if the law came to pass, just because, again, they figure it's valuable for other people, so they're going to make demands. It's kind of like the Likud has essentially become Shas. Like, this is exactly the behavior of Shas. Say no to everything that benefits someone else in order to trade the horse. This is why everyone else loathes Shas, and this is why Shas, which used to be kingmaker, at this point is fully dependent on Netanyahu, who didn't win the last election. I don't think is likely to win the upcoming one. And so, due to what is, again, just very petty politics, something that, again, I'm not going to say it's going to pass the Knesset, the Metro Law, with like 100 out of 120 votes. No, it's going to pass with a smaller majority, but you don't need 100 out of 120 votes to pass things in the Knesset. You need, I want to say you need 61. You don't even need 61. You need more yeses than nos. Members of Knesset constantly make deals where a member of coalition, a member of opposition will not show up so they can do other things or just goof off, and then the laws will just pass on the same relative majority. Instead of 61 to 59 or something, they pass 21 to 19. It's actually a thing. So they don't. So again, something that they need, but out of a lot of pettiness and out of not wanting to just say no, Rana and NIMBYs, go to hell, is why they're not passing the Metro Law. And this is and it's going to be a problem. As I said, it's not going to derail the entire project. Okay, maybe it's going to reduce it, so things like only building it as far as Glilot, only maybe not building an entire branch, or you're not building the Rana section. But most likely, it's just going to mean it's going to be built more or less along this alignment, but at higher cost is the risk. And again, the cost, as I saw in 2020, was about $40 billion. I'm going to check again. Tel Aviv Metro construction cost, and when English doesn't work, I'm going to use my magic powers and so now they're saying 40 billion euros. Global construction review. And this is annoying because it's gonna because I'm gonna need to. Right, so this is late 2021. This is a hair more than $40 billion, but I need to check. So what is it? Euro to dollar. Dollars. So strong, the euro is such trash. So this would be 40 billion euros. Then, like in early December, we saw answers. So that would be what? Probably $45 billion. And now we need to PPP it. So USD to NA, and this is the annoying thing about currencies. Like most people don't PPP. They should PPP. They're wrong not to PPP. So this is actually, we said $45 billion. This is 45 times 317. It's not even 130. It's 140 something billion shekels. Now we're gonna do the actual conversion rate. Like they're talking about, is a Tel Aviv Metro worth it? They crunch numbers. Note, by the way, that they're not saying how long these lines are. They're not doing per kilometer. Or they're barely doing per kilometer. And if they had talked to me, I would say that, yeah, it's just pretty normal construction cost. Israel is 3.8 to the dollar. So the cost that they're talking about is $37 billion, exactly $350 million per kilometer. Give or take, I shouldn't say exactly, give or take a few percent. And this is exactly global median, and I don't get why they think it's. I mean, I guess it's objectively expensive, but it's also a big project. Again, it's a good project. The worry is that if they don't pass the metro law, it's going to create more surface area for further demands that will increase the cost. Things like when Haifa made up reasons to object to the electrification project, they lied that it would that high voltage wire is carcinogenic in order to extract a promise to put the tracks here in a trench because they wanted because they wanted something about beach access out of here. Um, so I'm gonna stop here, and I'm gonna ask if anyone has questions, and I will tell you in about 5 minutes if. Okay, is this flying? Yeah, so I don't have a lot of time, is what I'm gonna say. So I do need to leave very soon. Um, let's say 8:40 is the hard stop, an hour and a half of recording. So my question is, again, do people have questions? I will take questions for the next couple minutes about this or related topics. O slash. I'm feeling like a boomer for not recognizing the O slash command. Oh, hi. Yeah, hi. Did you just get here? Or or were you just lurking? Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I need to end. So probably need to end right now because the oh, I see. Anyway, this is so I said that it's long. Would I shorten it? I don't know. Um, if I wanted to nitpick the if I wanted to nitpick the map, I would nitpick other things. Um, honestly, I could say cutting this part, cutting Hodesh Shalom, and then just making this a little shorter, but it's just very small. Um, like I mean, I guess there are parts of M1 that look duplicative with mainline rail, but they don't quite serve the same places as mainline rail. Like I don't like maybe you can cut a branch or something, but I don't think you can turn the 150 kilometers into even 100. Maybe you can turn it into 140. Um, even 130 would be a pretty big cut. So, and if anything, I would expand here. The fact that this and this don't meet is so awkward, or this and this, like this should go like this. And so it's not. Um, and so I think that yeah, it's long, but I mean, Tel Aviv is a big city. I mean, it's a metro area of 4 million people. When you go through the actual extent, so all the way to Rehovot and all the way to Lod, and maybe not all the way to Netanya, but great, but all the way to Ra'anana and Kfar Saba. Like, I mean, all of these, and in conjunction with an S-Bahn, that's a pretty large extent, and yeah, it needs a pretty large system. Like, again, 150. I mean, 150. I mean, Berlin is around there, maybe a little less. And yeah, Berlin, you think of it, oh, it's a large city, capital of a large country, but Metro Berlin is not that much larger than Metro Tel Aviv. So, um, when I say costs are about average, I mean, yes, costs tend to rise over time. They absolutely do. But the point of the Metro Law is to short circuit one of the mechanisms that leads costs to rise, which is that if you politically commit early, then there's a lot of time for local actors to make demands that increase the costs. Because the political cost of saying no and then walking away is too high. So the Metro Law is intended to short circuit that. Um, adding better, I mean, I don't think that redundant connections are especially valuable here. Like to be honest, it should just run reliably. Like the metro is going to run reliably. They can make the S-Bahn run reliably if they ever make it an S-Bahn. It's just they need to invest in the S-Bahn, but it's not. But very little of the metro can be cut. They just need to, I think, pass the metro law. If it were actually there, I would study this in enough detail to say exactly how they can build it for not 250 million per kilometer, but like maybe less. But it's not going to be massive less. It's going to be 100. It's going to be 150, 170. Yeah, exactly. It's automated light metro. Yeah, you would still need the good transfer points. Exactly. So, and again, my complaint is that transfer points are kind of weak, very long walks, or this particular gap annoys me greatly. Like, I get why it exists. Like, it was supposed to only go like this, and then they kept expanding, but just close the gap. Like, they said 8:40 is kind of a hard stop, so unless people have a very important thing to say in the next minute, I'm gonna stop this. Thanks for participating, especially thanks for Jonathan for all the netbacks. Yeah, 4 million people is nearly, yeah, it's nearly half the population of Israel. It would have a huge effect, and even bigger than you think, because these are the, for the most part, wealthier 4 million, to the point that in Tel Aviv, car ownership is, I believe, higher than national average, just because of the wealth effect. So, obviously, a place like Bat Yam, maybe not, but Tel Aviv, Ramat Gan, Ra'anana. So yes, it would have an enormous effect on car usage. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you again with another video next week.